The trade deadline is still a ways away, but I'm going to tell you some fits that might make sense for the Kansas City Royals. That's all coming up in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you are a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, well, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, do some hosting, co-hosting, and some producing as well. So in my day job, I stay pretty busy in the sports world. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you are getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah, and the right way you can make a fan of any city, even your rivals. Check out Booking.com for your stay today. And one last reminder that any comments and questions can be left on our YouTube page, or you can send them to my Twitter account at JohnnyJ_15. Well, I know it's a little bit of a later episode today, and I could have dedicated a large part of tonight's show about a big-time win against the Cleveland Guardians, and we'll sprinkle in some talk about that Game 1 showing from the Royals, an important Game 1 showing, and we'll also dive into Michael Wacha's importance in the third and final segment today. But this came into my mind earlier today, and I want to make sure that I hit on this because I think after a night like tonight, a lot of people are still going to be wondering who the Royals are going to be looking after. Does it make sense to buy? I'm going to be talking about in segment number 2 why I do not think they're going to be sellers regardless of what their record looks like at that point in time. And this first segment is going to be showing why I do think they're buyers and who I think they're going to go after. To kick things off here, I think it's very important to point out that the National League is where a lot of the trades are going to happen. I think from teams in the American League, not necessarily the Royals, but a lot of American League teams are going to be trading prospects and trading big-time players in the National League and vice versa. National League sellers will be going to the American League, or National League buyers will be going to the American League, because you don't want to see your opponent every single year, although that could happen because you do play every single team now, but it's different than trading, in division. Yeah, even though you don't see them, 18, 19 times a year, you still see them a lot more than if you were to trade them to a National League team and you see them once a year. And if they're a pitcher, maybe it doesn't fall on that weekend that you play said team. But I do think that's where a lot of the trades are going to be happening. For instance, I think that the White Sox are going to work out some deal with either the Phillies or the Dodgers, or maybe even the Padres. We know how aggressive the Padres are to send Luis Robert to one of those teams, or Garrett Crochet, Michael Kopech. I know the Royals have been scouting him. It wouldn't shock me if he goes to the National League side because they don't want to help out the Royals. But you could also make the case that an American League team will trade with another American League team that's just not in their division. And if you are a true seller, as are a few teams in the American League, it can make a lot of sense. So that factors in here. And on the National League side, there's not a lot of sellers just yet. Colorado's a seller. You could argue that Miami, I'm not going to say argue, Miami is a seller. So Miami and Colorado are both sellers there. And there's a lot of teams that are still in it. I wish that Washington was further out than they are, because they have two pitchers that I think would really bolster this Royals bullpen, and Kyle Finnegan and Hunter Harvey. But they're still kind of in the mix in the wild card picture. And right now I look at it, you have Colorado and Miami, 14 and 12 and a half games back. Then the Cubs are the third worst team in the National League, and they're 4 games out of the wild card. You look at Washington, they're 3 games out of the wild card. The Reds, they're 3.5. San Francisco's 3 games out. So you're not going to be trading with those teams, in my opinion. So I jumped to the American League side and who may make sense for the Royals. On the wild card picture, we know the White Sox are going to be a seller. The only player I think the Royals could go after would be Michael Kopech. Still holding out hope for that. It would come down to if the White Sox want to trade in division. You have Oakland. I think there are a few guys that make sense for the Royals in Ursig, also Austin Adams. Mason Miller, the price tag is going to be too high there, so I don't believe that is going to work out. And the guy on the cover of our podcast today that I think makes a lot of sense and has already been linked to the Royals through a few articles is Carlos Estevez of the Los Angeles Angels. It's Estevez or Estevez, close enough. You might know who I'm talking about. I apologize if I don't have that name correctly. But the closer for the Angels. And even though the Angels have won 4 in a row, they've won 6 of their last 10, they're still 9.5 games out of a wild card spot. The Rangers, who the Royals just got swept by and humiliated by, have now lost 4 in a row, and they are 7 games back. And the Tigers, same thing, 7 games back. The Blue Jays are 6.5 games back. So all of those teams you can't really lump together. I think you could lump the Angels, A's, and White Sox together as sellers. The other ones may or may not be. I think the unfortunate part is that Tampa Bay has suddenly gotten red hot. Same thing for Houston, who's won 7 in a row. So Jason Adam is a name that popped up for the Royals looking into. But are we sold the Rays are going to be punting on a playoff opportunity? Yeah, they're probably punting on a division title. That's not going to happen. But for a wild card spot, they're 4 games back of one. And I think a strong piece of that Rays team is their bullpen, and Jason Adam being one of those guys. So it would make sense because of the local ties, and he's pitched for the Royals before. But again, that's what makes it so tough here in the trade opportunities. And when I was filling in for Seren Petra on 810 earlier this week, we had a chance to talk with Sam McDowell, and he's, of course, the columnist for the Kansas City Star. And when I asked him about whether the Royals need to make a trade now or in the future, he told me that the problem is there's just not many identified sellers. And those sellers don't need to be desperate. They could wait around and say, hey, we're still going to be sellers by the deadline. We don't know if you're going to be buyers just yet. They may be asking for a lot to deal that player right now, then maybe wait a little longer. But there are guys that I think are coming to light that are going to be the ones the Royals really target and seriously target. If you are looking for a lineup bat, a leadoff hitter, I don't see it happening. The only one they've truly been linked to is Tommy Pham. And I'm not sold that Tommy Pham is going to be an option for the Royals, and maybe he wouldn't be the best fit. Bullpen arms, though, I'm looking at the Angels, I'm looking at Oakland, I'm looking at the White Sox. To me, that's about it. Miami, maybe. Tanner Scott's price is going to be a little bit higher, but I'm looking at Carlos Estevez of the Angels. I'm looking at Austin Adams for Oakland. I'm looking at Michael Kopech of the White Sox. Those, to me, feel like the 3 options. I just don't see Texas selling 1 year after winning the World Series. The Tigers, I do think, are going to sell, but I do not believe it's going to be with the Royals. The Blue Jays are going to sell. I don't think it's going to be with the Royals because they have a bad bullpen, and I don't think they would be willing to trade any of their offensive players to the Royals, and I don't think the Royals have what the Blue Jays are looking for. I look at Tampa Bay. They're 4 games out. I don't see them selling. Don't see Houston selling. Don't see Boston selling. So that's the American League. On the National League side, yeah, I could make a case for Colorado, but is there anybody you truly want from Colorado at this point in time? I've been asked about Charlie Blackmon before. I don't think that's an upgrade for the outfield. I like Justin Lawrence at one point for the Rockies bullpen because of the weird angle and the high velocity fastball, but I just don't know if it's trustworthy enough. And I would like to say that the numbers at Coors Field are always inflated because of the altitude. I mean, no pitcher coming out of their bullpen has really thrived that much. And then with Miami and Chicago, I think Chicago is going to try to buy. They're going to try to make a strong push, being 4 games back and knowing that a good week or 2 can put them back in a wild card spot. Miami and Colorado, though, they're the only 2 sellers in the National League. So that can make it a little bit more difficult to strike a deal with them right now. The Royals can take their time, though. And with a win like tonight to put you 7 games over 500, it makes you feel better, one, but also I think kind of erases the last week or so, the poor stretch of play. And really, this week has been fine. They're 3-1 in the first 4 games of the week, and we'll see what they'll do over the weekend. And more importantly, we'll see when the Royals want to strike a deal. I do think they're going to be buyers, and that's going to lead us into segment number 2. I do not think there's a world in which they're going to be a seller. I don't even give it a 1% chance. If I'm wrong, I will admit when I'm wrong. It will be cold takes exposed, all of that. But we're going to dive into why they won't be sellers next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. We want to give a shout out to a couple of our sponsors today, starting with Tax Network USA. Here on Locked On Royals, we pride ourselves on getting you the latest news for your team, whether it's the offseason, the draft, spring training, or the playoffs. It's going to be year-round. You know what else is year-round? Collection season. Just because tax season is over doesn't mean the IRS will stop coming after you for unfiled taxes. The IRS can garnish your wages, levy your bank accounts, and even seize your property. Don't let the IRS target you. Let the licensed professionals and tax experts at Tax Network USA go to bat for you. With over 14 years of experience and an A-plus rating by the Better Business Bureau, Tax Network USA has saved their clients over $1 billion in tax debt. Whether you owe taxes, have complicated matters that require tax planning, or finally hit that parlay this season and need help correctly filing, call 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/lockedon, and you can see that link in the episode description below. We also want to tell you about our other sponsors in eBay Motors. And with eBay Motors, it's passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. An eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. During the rough stretch of play over the last week or so for the Kansas City Royals, I think there were a number of people that reached out to me, basically asking the question of, should they be sellers now? They clearly are not good enough to make a second half push. They'll never be as good as Cleveland. They're never going to be able to compete with Boston or Minnesota, Baltimore, New York, or there is the side of they shouldn't trade for anybody because if they fall short, it will look bad on this team. And I view it quite the opposite way. I think that J.J. Picollo has had this in his mind for quite some time, and he's not really jumping back and forth between what is his belief and maybe what the fans' belief is, or questioning what his team is capable of. I don't think he's being wishy-washy with that, for a better term there. He made it very clear in this offseason, and once they got off to a good start, that a part of signing Bobby Witt Jr. to a long-term extension, a part of signing Seth Lugo, a part of signing Michael Wacha was also showing to them that we are going to give you a chance here. We are going to give you a chance to compete for playoff baseball in Kansas City. And it's not always, black and white. It's not always easy to make the decision. And there are front offices that are overly aggressive. It doesn't work out. And then the easy thing to do as a fan is say, well, that was stupid to go all in. There are people that believe in 2017 that the Royals were stupid to make that trade with San Diego, sending Matt Strahm, Estuary Ruiz, and Travis Wood for Brandon Maurer, Ryan Buchter, and Trevor Cahill. in the end, Matt Strom did become a good relief arm. He's pretty good for Philadelphia, despite getting roughed up tonight against Miami. But he's been a very good piece for the Phillies. Not the Padres anymore, though. Estuary Ruiz is bouncing back and forth between AAA and the big leagues in Oakland. And Travis Wood, I don't know the last time he played in a big league game. As for the other three, it didn't work out in Kansas City. But I look at it quite the opposite. I'm glad that the last time the core was there in Kansas City, Dayton Moore gave them a shot. And I think it was to honor that you've brought us so much fun and competitive baseball here. We're not going to sell you guys at the deadline because we're not confident. And though it's a much different scenario this year than what 2017 was, I think that the Royals are going to give these guys a shot to make a push. And deep down in your heart, even when you were negative or you were doubting them this last week, I think in your heart you knew that you wanted them to buy. Maybe you still think they should be a seller. Maybe tomorrow if they lose, you're going to be vocal about them being a seller. I'm here to tell you, and I could be wrong, I give it a less than 1% chance that they are selling. Mainly because I think by the time the deadline rolls around, they're not going to be outside of 5 games of a playoff spot. They lose 10 or 15 in a row, then yeah, you might need to reevaluate. But I think they're going to be in it. And if they're in it, they're either buying or they're not doing anything. And J.J. Picollo has been very consistent about that. It has been giving these guys a shot. And it's also a free agent pitch to other guys out there and guys for next year. Hey, you come to Kansas City, we're going to pay you. You'll be a big part of our team. And if you're in it, we're not going to be one of those cheap teams that trades guys away because you're 500 or a game out or 2 games out, and we don't think that you're going to go far. That can lead to some strain between the team itself and the front office management. And I think the Royals this year feel like this is a year to capitalize on a great start. And though they've had their struggles, they are 11-19 over their last 30 games, but they are still 7 games over 500. And as of tonight, they hold a playoff spot. And if you hold a playoff spot, or you are a half game out of one, or 1 game out by the deadline, and you don't buy, I can live with staying with what you got. I truly could. I couldn't really live with selling. If you sold Seth Lugo, you sold Michael Wacha, you sold Hunter Renfroe, I think it would show to all the guys here, the core of your team, that we're not really serious about winning. And I've heard the arguments of, well, they're already not serious about winning to begin with, or they're really not that good, and this is always who they were. I think a fun part about baseball is, it's a year-to-year thing. Just because you're good this year or average or bad doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be that next year. It's always a new year. It's always fresh. And I look at it in the way of, do you think Seth Lugo does this next year? Do you think Michael Wacha does this next year? Do you think some of your bullpen arms can do this next year? Do you think you'll have 2 guys that hit like Bobby Witt Jr. and Salvador Perez next year? Probably more so Bobby Witt Jr. than Salvador Perez. But you get the point I'm going for here. There's no guarantee the Royals are 34-19 at some point next year. They may get off to a slow start. And I think for all the turmoil and the bad baseball the fan base has gone through, it's worth it to, I think, make a push. Now, let me be very clear. I'm not saying sell your soul for this year, because I don't believe this is a team that wins the World Series. I do believe this is a team that can get into the playoffs. They just need a little extra help. And if it doesn't work out, I will stand by this. If it doesn't work out and you are a game out and you added a bullpen arm or 2 and you traded away maybe your 12th best prospect or your 15th best prospect, look, that's still an entire year of competitive baseball, and the Royals changed the culture in just 1 year, and 1 year moved from tying your franchise record for losses in a season. So to me, it wouldn't be seen as a failure. Now, you go all in. You trade away Blake Mitchell. You trade away Ben Kudrna, Caden Wallace, Gavin Cross, Blake Walters, all of those guys. Yeah, that would be seen as a failure because you emptied your farm system to not make it. But I don't see the Royals doing that. I think the reliever market, as I've said numerous times in the last few weeks, is going to be very affordable. And they can give up a prospect or 2 to bolster this bullpen and give themselves a really good chance to get into October. If you're one of those people that thinks if they don't win the World Series, it's a bust either way, then yeah, I would recommend them selling or not doing anything. If you just want to see this team get into October, I think there's a real scenario in which they buy a couple of bullpen arms. They don't give up a ton with their farm system, and they can make things really fun in the second half. But I can sit here and tell you right now where things stand, less than a 1% chance this team is selling. I've never been more confident all year long in the fact that this team will not be selling. If I am, I'll expose myself. I will say it's cold takes exposed. I will never make an outlandish take like that again. But as things stand right now, I do not see them being a seller. Okay, before we move on to our final segment, I want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When we come back, I'm going to tell you about the importance of Michael Wacha staying healthy for a second half push. That's coming up next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to a couple more sponsors today, and we're going to kick it off with Booking.com. With summer travel heating up, especially for travel baseball games, it's time to explore those U.S. cities and secretly wanted to learn more about. Yes, we're talking about your rival cities with hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com. You might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival's city. Now, as you guys all know, I was down in Arlington this past weekend. It was an ugly series for the Royals, but I had the chance to go through this app, this website, wherever you want to go through, basically with Booking.com, and get everything set up and taken care of. They showed me the best deals, and it was lots of fun. I didn't have any stress going in there. The only stress I had was whether they'd get swept or not, and they did get swept in this game. But nonetheless, Booking.com is going to take care of everything for you. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com on the site or in the Booking.com app. Also want to tell you a little bit more about LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and it's a sales intelligence platform that helps professionals effectively prospect and engage high-value customers, drive higher revenue, and increase sales performance. Sales Navigator helps you target the right buyers, surface key signals such as job changes or which accounts you should prioritize, and shows you hidden allies so you can find those buyers that are more likely to convert. Fueled by LinkedIn's 1 billion member platform, Sales Navigator gives you the most up-to-date first-party data, enabling you to unlock conversations with the people that matter. Right now, you can try LinkedIn Sales Navigator and get a 60-day free trial at linkedin.com/lockedon. That is linkedin.com/lockedon for a 60-day free trial. Let LinkedIn Sales Navigator help you sell like a superstar today. Just go to linkedin.com/lockedon and go get started. I think tonight showed a few things about this Royals team, but I think one spot that went maybe not as noticed because Sam Long was so good out of the bullpen and saved the start from Michael Wacha, more so than the bullpen behind Sam Long and John Schreiber and James McArthur locking it down. It overshadowed just how important Michael Wacha is to this rotation. And I think it's very simple why he's important. They spent a lot of money to bring him here, to be a piece of this rotation, to stabilize it. And last year, that was something you couldn't count on from even one spot. You had Zach Greinke and Jordan Lyles and Brady Singer and Brad Keller and Daniel Lynch going every fifth day. That was the rotation for this team. And the 1A reason, I know that I'm going to break it down maybe more than I need to. The 1A reason is that he's a steady arm. He is somebody that you can count on every fifth day. He'll give you 5 or 6 innings. Yeah, he runs out of gas from time to time, but I don't have any complaints from what I've seen from Michael Wacha. The 1B part of it is that the Royals have no starting depth. And if one of those guys goes down in the second half, and you just hope that it's not your, big four, big five, and I'm not even going to try to short end anybody here or shortchange anybody here. If any of those five guys, they're all very important. And I'm not going to say they're equal because we know Seth Lugo and Cole Reagans have been the 1-2 punch. And then Michael Wacha and Brady Singer kind of in a tier of their own. And then Alec Marsh isn't far behind him. One of those guys goes down. The Royals have no starting pitching depth. And that's where it's going to be interesting nearing the deadline if J.J. Picollo thinks the exact same thing. We saw Daniel Lynch throw here in Kansas City. He had a good start against Texas. He had an okay start against Minnesota. Terrible after that. Now, Daniel Lynch, when we talked to him for the last time before getting demoted, didn't really think that he was bad against the Yankees and he wanted to start and not be an opener. I don't know if Daniel Lynch will get another chance in Kansas City. He might just be there for AAA depth and insurance that if somebody does go down, he's made starts at the big league level and you turn to him. But Michael Wacha, losing him for just that month or so, or a little bit under a month, I thought it was detrimental to the rotation. Absolutely detrimental. Because when Brady Singer was struggling, you went from Brady Singer to Daniel Lynch to Alec Marsh. Those were three guys that were in the rotation last year. And though Singer has been better this year, Alec Marsh has been better. It put a lot of pressure, a lot of strain on Cole Reagans and Seth Lugo to carry the workload. And that was something that I believed to be too much. That was something I believed led to this sluggish start. If they would have had Michael Wacha for the majority of that gauntlet, I think there would have been a few games, and one in Minnesota that comes to mind. I think the start against Seattle, though the Royals won, would have been a lot better. I think the start that he had against the Yankees would have had the upper hand, I believe, in that start because they went with Daniel Lynch and Dan Altavilla, in that game where the Royals were chasing the entire time. Michael Wacha throws in that game. The Royals probably have a better chance through the first 6 innings than they did using Dan Altavilla as an opener. So few times, but I do think enough times where you go, man, if Michael Wacha was out on the bump, you just feel good about the start. Tonight, same exact thing. Michael Wacha being out there and not Daniel Lynch or Jonathan Bolin or Anthony Veneziano or an opener was huge. The Royals get smacked by Cleveland if it was any of those other guys. But Michael Wacha was able to give the team 5 1/3. Sam Long picked him up, and the rest of the bullpen did the job. The offense only gave him 2 runs, but you can't ask much more for a guy that just came off the injured list last weekend. And 2 starts, he's gone 5 innings and 5 1/3, and he's given up 2 total runs. And he's been really good since his ugly start against Texas at Kauffman Stadium. So this second half, as important as it's been in 7 years, it's equally as important that this rotation stays healthy. And even guys like Michael Wacha, Brady Singer, I put them together, that they have to stay healthy. There is no depth that you can rely on for a playoff push in the second half. Maybe J.J. Picollo realizes that and you go make a trade to give you a 6th guy. Maybe somebody emerges like Chris Bubic. I've heard a lot of talk about Chris Bubic being in this rotation, getting an opportunity. I think he's going to be coming out of the pen. And I don't want to put the pressure on a guy coming off Tommy John to be the 6th starter. Maybe we have no choice, but we heard from J.J. Picollo that they've already kind of transitioned him into a bullpen arm. So that would be step 1 for Bubic. When he gets to Kansas City, it'll be out of the bullpen. If he's forced into that situation to be a starter because somebody got hurt, I think I would take that over the alternatives that we've seen so far from the Royals this year. But fingers crossed, the Royals don't deal with it the rest of the year because Michael Wacha, I tip my cap to him, tip my cap to Sam Long tonight, tip my cap to Matt Quatrero getting ejected, Kyle Isbell, Michael Garcia, Vinny Pasquantino, John Schreiber, James MacArthur for a win in Game 1 against Cleveland. Tomorrow it'll be Alec Marsh on the bump against Tristan McKenzie as the Royals go to at least earn a split of this 4-game series against the Guards. Okay, one last thing I want to say before we wrap up today's show is a little bit of a shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV Channels app. Tomorrow, it's going to be another Mailbag Friday. Tons of questions about this bullpen, Chris Bubich, and this lineup. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.